Now that Putin has left the Kremlin, it is crystal clear what he is trying to get away from. The military and administration as a whole are calling for Putin to resign. His heated discussions with a nearby military official served as additional proof of his resentment of Putin. The military operations, surprise, left Putin unable to recover. There have been anti-war demonstrations for a very long time, and they're getting more numerous it becomes more evident every day how inadequate the Russian military is at what it does. Putin is under increasing strain as a result of his inability to keep his promises to his people. The reactions have reached a point where they can no longer be controlled because the conflict, which was only meant to last a few weeks, has now lasted for more than a. It is thought that Vladimir Putin should resign from his post at this time because he has demonstrated a dictatorial side, especially since the war started from the location of work. According to one school of thought, someone needs to be held accountable for Russia's present economic situation, which is similar to the rest of the world, to take the required actions to make this happen. Russian bureaucrats have gathered in the Kremlin. The fact that Russia, which has been criticized heavily by the bureaucrats, has been humiliated in the media all over the world and cannot even muster supporters, persists in its invasion efforts is met with a great deal of criticism. The commanders are determined to overthrow the king, some of whom have already had their names referenced in relation to the coup issues. The commanders swore under oath that the rebels who flew the flag of insurrection were trying to join the war. It is now abundantly obvious that Putin's irrational actions will have no beneficial effects. Putin's ability to run the country is seriously hampered by the reality that everyone in it shares the same viewpoint, from soldiers to citizens, and from brokerage to soldiers. Whether or not Putin will resign from his post as a result of this false information is currently unknown. Soon after the KGB informed Putin of the efforts to challenge his authority, Putin went to the headquarters. He was aware of them because the FSB had told him about them. When Putin wanted to gauge the soldiers' mood, he received answers from them that were very different from what he had expected. Putin was shocked by the soldiers' lack of concern for him, as well as the fact that one of them explicitly complained about their ammunition. Putin's private security detail battled off counter-soldiers as other private security guards led Putin into a security. Although it was only a small disturbance, there was some noise. Then the abducted troops were taken into custody and removed from the area. In an effort to defuse the tense situation, Putin decided to have dinner with the troops. However, the reactions during the meal were quite harsh. He then went to dinner with the other troops after this. The troops showed no sign of responding to his attempts to encourage them with a few words of encouragement. Despite his best efforts, Putin requested that one of his officers sample some of his food before starting his meal. Putin was in for another surprise when the cop collapsed from the food's odor. The headquarters officer was quickly apprehended and taken. Much later, we learned that Putin had given the directive calling for the commander to give a testimony in front of a military tribunal. Israel and the United Kingdom have been regarded as Ukraine's most significant backers throughout the entirety of this war. In the most recent instance, these nations' highly developed intelligence networks provided Ukraine with knowledge about Putin's headquarters. As soon as Ukraine learned of this, they started making a range. They were trying to time their movements properly as they counted down the seconds after that. They started scanning for variations. The scanning revealed there was no issue that would pose a challenge, so that was decided C4S and bombs for remote control. Already, the Russian soldiers were driven out of the HQ by the Ukrainian forces. Soldiers from Ukraine resumed their assault on the enemy after realizing there was no answer to their call for. But this time, they encountered no opposition. Unrelenting assaults were launched against the command post, and they didn't stop until it was totally destroyed. The bombardment had the immediate result of killing a large number of Russian fighters. In addition, among the debris, a security guard for Putin was found dead. Venice. The cell phone was taken and thoroughly examined. Putin had left the headquarters sooner than initially. The Ukrainians acknowledged how much Putin had been missed. A hair's width. At most, they fail in their attempt to apprehend and interrogate the leader at the headquarters. During this interrogation, they were able to learn details about the internal conflicts that occurred in the headquarters before the explosion. The commander's comments were caught on video, and they later led to an event that shocked the entire word press. See, the revelations have concluded. The leader revealed that Putin had been assassinated during this entire incident. The Kremlin was kept in the dark about the situation, thanks to the clever move made by Ukraine and the use of jammers. Because of this, Putin was kept in the dark about what was happening until Ukraine had enough time. Putin doesn't hold back when it comes to publicly expressing his rage after being informed of the destruction and the confession. He decided on the spur of the moment to convene a meeting of all the influential figures in the Russian Federation. The decisions that the opposition leaders made behind closed doors sparked a strong response despite the fact that they were not allowed to attend the meeting. Notable individuals, including their names, witnessed the meeting. At the end of the 9-hour meeting, Putin published the decisions, and they were so significant that they totally eclipsed everything else that had been published. Because when one looks at the details of these recent decisions, it is obvious that Russia has instantly changed into a dictatorial government. The country's citizens, who already face a number of challenges as a result of the present political climate, faced an additional challenge as a result of these statements, which completely undermined the idea of democracy. The military was no longer permitted to make any independent choices as a result of these decisions. Instead, a new structure was established in which they were only required to obey instructions. The military leaders resisted once more despite having already received excessive criticism and pressure. As soon as this new decision was made, public people who claimed they were being repressed by stringent laws, organized demonstrations, and destruction took to the streets. It appears that the army is enforcing new regulations. At the same time that more people are participating in anti-war demonstrations, Putin will continue to exert pressure in the same manner or even increase it. It is notable that Putin has appointed himself to both the Coup Prevention Committee and the Election Supervisory Board. Because of this, he can be certain that no one else in the nation has a. Putin has used this tactic to effectively oust everyone in a position of power. It is also widely known that he has created an organization with the goal of obstructing any rivals who want to depose Putin from power. How terrified Putin is of their potential reactions can be seen by the fact that this group has almost absolute power. Russia is already engaged in and now it must also contend with domestic unrest and an uncoordinated army, which will exhaust all of the nation's resources. Whitewasher is having issues, but it must continue operating as it is right now due to a lack of money or other support. Putin continues to kill people in the areas that he unlawfully occupies, while also utterly disregarding the lives of his own. Russia's fortifications, according to conflict analysts, are about to be totally destroyed. It has been stated in the most recent statements that Ukraine's weaponry has already surpassed the point at which Russia can be defeated. It is only a matter of time before Ukraine succeeds due to the overwhelming support, which in its shared resistance to the occupation abandons the defensive position and takes the oath. At the same time, the fact that Russia has begun to implement such strict policies despite having entered a serious economic decline seems to be enough to spin things out of control. Vladimir will meet with Putin, who is trying to impose a dictatorial system that is totally unacceptable in the modern age, when as many people as possible in the entire world are determined to try every means to achieve his goal. Will Putin be deterred from the invasion by such a significant press? Putin is even willing to take on the entire globe in order to accomplish his goals. Despite the fact that everyone in the world is looking for an answer to this question, these hopes are still being dashed. With each new remark made by Putin, assassination attempts and other similar events, the protests and attempted coups that have been planned in response to this problem seem to have only inflamed Putin's. Nobody can predict with certainty when Putin's current employment will terminate. Putin's policies caused the demise of Russia, and now his own people are calling for a shift in course. Slogans calling for Putin to leave office could be heard throughout the protests. The president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, did something that is incomprehensible, although it is well known that Lukashenko is tight with Vladimir Putin. He has betrayed the Russian. Putin was extremely enraged with Lukashenko. As a result of this recently, a variety of difficult challenges have been encountered by the Russian army stationed on the Belarusian border. Discussions about this new area of study are presently taking place all over the world. Russia asserts that despite the fact that the conflict in Ukraine is at its height, President Putin is still sending occupying Russian forces into Ukrainian territory. Vladimir Putin recently decided to mobilize Russian forces, and he is presently enlisting more citizens of Russia in the military. It is believed that the war cost the lives of about 150,000 soldiers. The Russian army has started training a large number of new troops as a result of the failure of the operations. It planned and oversaw the Russian army has suffered significantly more fatalities on the Soar and Mamu. This is due to the fact that the offices of the Russian army are situated just outside of Belgorod Garage to replenish the troops they lost there. In a statement, Ukrainian officials asserted that just on the Bakhmut front, the Russian army was losing more than 800 troops daily. Russian forces have been trying to take Bakhmut for 4 months, and it is estimated that tens of thousands of Russian soldiers have died as a result of their operation. Vladimir Putin has stated that he will be getting ready for a significant operation at this facility. More land in Ukraine will be seized as a result of this action. Using an example, he declared that they would follow his example to cross into Ukrainian territory via the Belarusian border and then proceed all the way to Kiev with 50,000 Russian soldiers. Russian President Vladimir Putin intended to advance as far as Kiev in this operation. with the goal of quickly occupying the capital. This procedure did not, however, go as expected. This has never happened before. When Ukrainian intelligence learned that Putin was deploying a sizable contingent of forces to the Belarusian border, they acted swiftly and decisively to send a sizable contingent of Ukrainian troops to prevent Russian soldiers from crossing this border in any way. It has put defense systems in place at numerous points along the border. Ukrainian forces waited at the Belarusian border for a while, but Russian forces did not enter the area or initiate any attacks while they were there. The justification for why Russian forces remained neutral during this war, and Syria is where the lessons were. Later, it turned out that the Russian troops did not advance at the border because the Belarusian authorities had stopped them from doing so, and that is why they had not. The latency region, which approaches the Belarusian border with Ukraine, would have 50,000 soldiers stationed there. From there, they would advance up to the Ukrainian borders and toward Kiev. This area reaches the border between Belarus and. This idea, however, was soon dispelled when Alexander Lukashenko, the president of Belarus, issued a startling order. Belarus refused to let Russian troops cross the border because it lacked the necessary force to protect them. The conflict between the Russian and Belarusian armies that had been going on in this area escalated as a result of the action that Lukashenko took. Putin marched his entire 50,000-strong army to the Belarusian, but some of the Russian soldiers refused to leave the region. The Belarusian leadership put up a lot of opposition to the Russian soldiers who were opposing the withdrawal of their troops. Belarusian officials detained a sizable number of Russian soldiers. As a result of this tension, the commanders of the Belarusian army built a camp near the border and asked the Russian troops to wait there. This happened in the midst of a tense scenario. Vladimir Putin, the head of Russia, has disabled the S-400 air defense system in Belarus. Russian soldiers were unable to cross because Belarusian and army soldiers had blocked their way. The Belarusian president was dealt a serious shock. When these devices were turned off, Putin had the authority to turn off this safeguard, which was the cause of this. You can access the system at any. Being ignorant of this and unsure of what to do, the Belarusian governor was taken off guard. Lukashenko was forced to keep an unusually close relationship with the United States and other Western countries because his defenses were rendered ineffective. The reason Lukashenko had decided against sending Russian soldiers across the border became apparent after. This is because Belarus's President Lukashenko is under pressure from the U.S. and other Western nations to prevent recent Russian troops from crossing the border. The significant assistance that Belarus has given to Russia was the topic of debate at the meeting of Western nations and the United States that took place at the UN. He declared that efforts would be made to prevent Russia from aiding Belarus and that precautions would be taken to prevent the Russian troops from crossing the border into Belarusian and territory. He declared that Belarus assistance would end. It is well known that the government of Belarus is compelled to continue relying on the leaders of Western countries for many of its decisions. Despite having relatively little established output, Belarus is able to meet most of its. The concerned nation has access to Western products like food, medication, and technology. If Russian forces invade Belarus, several Western nations are prepared to impose a severe trade embargo. These nations are conscious of this reality. It is anticipated that this will cause Belarus' economy to. Following these threats, Belarusian President Lukashenko was forced to recognize the couple and his close friendship with Russian President Putin. This led Belarusian leader Lukashenko to behave more like a Western leader, along with the reality that Russia was losing the war more and more every day. Following these developments, Lukashenko was compelled to accept the couple, their close friendship, as well as the reality that Russia was rapidly losing the. Even though Russia was falling further behind in the war in Ukraine, Lukashenko began to take steps to strengthen his ties with the U.S. and other Western nations. As is well known, this war would harm not only Putin's allies, but also the entire Belarusian economy is made up completely of external products. The economy of Belarus will completely and utterly collapse if Western nations headed by the United States impose any kind of embargo. The Belarusian President Lukashenko, who was well known for his close friendship with Putin, was forced to lie to him in order to prevent this from occurring. Since the start of the war, many people have escaped to Russia and Ukraine from a wide range of nations. My countries have always had allies on every continent throughout history. Nobody saw it coming, but Belarus repeatedly adopted Russia's stance in dispute. The Kremlin was greatly shocked by this betrayal of Alexander Lukashenko from the start of the conflict to its conclusion, and it persisted throughout the entire process. However, this specific act of treachery was not the first that Lukashenko had committed prior to this betrayal. An incident that was crucial to both Ukrainian and Russian forces caused Russian forces to be driven back from the Lyman region where they had made major territorial advances by the middle of the. The Belarusian commanders in the region immediately ordered their troops to withdraw as soon as they observed that the Ukrainian army was responding. The Belarusian commanders had begun to depart before the region had been fully seized. They had not in any way communicated the attack to the Russian Russian soldiers who were unprepared. The Ukrainian army was able to regain its position of dominance in the region, thanks to the swift withdrawal of the attacking Ukrainian troops from the city of Demand. The Ukrainian forces believe their easiest route to success is through the city of Demand. In order for the Ukrainian force to regain its position as the most powerful, Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, must continue to cede territory in Ukraine. Putin could not have predicted the length of the conflict or the ferocity with which the Ukrainian army would struggle to maintain its freedom while the Russian army is presently attempting to retake the areas that it lost. The fact that Russian forces have lost the occupied territories once more has driven Putin to the point where he will lose his mind over it. Additionally, it takes a lot of Russian troops continue to desert the army along the Bakhmut front. Due to how difficult the conflict is, it appears that civil unrest will result from Putin's policies, which are harsh toward both his people and his soldiers. The indigenous people's economy suffered as a result of the conflict, and they began to take significant actions. Russia's populace as a whole is preparing for protests. In conjunction with Putin's announcement that he will step down as president of Russia, banners calling for his resignation are being flown in a number of locations in the nation. In the sentence, "A restaurant serves meals for your ease," there is a support and thanks option below. Ukraine has been dealing with flames that no one can explain since Russia began encroaching on its tea. Additionally, a large number of these fires are occurring in key areas along the Ukrainian-Russian border. Many commentators believe that Ukraine or the Russian people themselves began the fires as a form of resistance against being colonized. Despite the fact that the Russian government is unable to explain why these fires are occurring, another fire recently broke out and the Russian military will suffer serious harm the Russian military will sustain significant damage as a result of this fire, which started in the most significant facility of the country's explosives-focused defense sector, the Chaplinsky mechanical plant, which is situated in the Russian city of Chaplinsky. Within the Samara Lost was the site of the fire, one of the biggest factories producing explosives for the Russian army. This facility was regarded as the hub of the country's defense. Nobody is shocked that the Russian force struggles to obtain enough ammunition. Numerous ammunition stores were destroyed by the Ukrainian army during the first year of the war. Russia has produced more explosives and detonators that can harm mechanical plants in an effort to address this issue and find a remedy. On the other hand, the fact that the factory exploded demonstrates that the Russian military will still struggle to obtain enough production was underway and workers were going about their daily duties. When the explosion happened in the factory, the detonation was made stronger by the proximity of explosives inside the factory. Despite the fact that many other employees in the factory were able to flee when the explosion took place, one worker was killed as a direct result of the explosion. The 46-year-old employee wasn't the only one wounded in the fire. 3 other workers also sustained injury. Workers who had been burned or hurt were taken urgently to the closest hospital. The explosion and fire at the children's mechanical factory were not addressed by the Russian administration. An explosive device that was connected to detonator caps reportedly exploded. According to a report from one of the Russian news sources, the detonator pieces were used as the ignition source to ignite, and the explosion at the factory was allegedly caused by a breach of the factory's security measures, according to a different Russian news agency's report. However, the actual cause of the explosion is still unclear. The majority of authors who have written about the conflict between Russia and Ukraine have placed the blame for this explosion and other explosions in Russia on Ukraine and Russians who are opposing the occupation. One of them was the economist from Sweden, Anders Os. The explosions in Russia were happening at key points along the frontier with Ukraine. Oslin noted in a tweet over the past few months, he was referring to the reality that Russia and Ukraine have a common border. Since the start of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, the number of fires that have started across Russia has been gradually rising. Additionally, the cause of these flames often remains a secret. A recent fire in Moscow started in a structure that was extremely significant to the Russian occupiers. There is no known reason for this fire. This occurred in a facility in charge of the Soviet Army's research and development of aviation and naval missile weapons. Because of how powerful it was, the extent of the harm that this fire in Russia caused became apparent. The fire grew significantly worse when the fuel barrels inside the structure blew. Without the aid of 51 various fire departments, the blaze, which had grown to cover a total area of 1,500 square meters, could not have been extinguished. Millions of people all over the world watched the conflagration images that were posted to social media. The recordings that were circulated made the severity of the conflagration very clear. A late-night fire that managed to illuminate nearly the entire metropolis of Moss. There has been a great deal of worry recently as a result of a fire that started at the Central Research Center of the Aerospace Defense Forces in Tavar, a city in western Russia late at night. A 2,700 square meter area was rapidly covered by the fire, which had just begun. 6 individuals lost their lives in this fire, and another 25 were hospitalized as a result. Regarding the incident's origin, no information was. One of the terrible fires that happened in Russia was at an oil storage facility in the city of Belgorod. The fire was started at the oil depot, and because of this, it quickly spread to the nearby areas. In the vicinity of the gasoline depot, the fire spread to 3 separate streets. Homeowners were forced to leave the property. That is not how you should behave. You can read the statement issued about this fire by Governor Vyacheslav Gla. According to Governor Gla, 2 Ukrainian armed forces helicopters attacked the oil depot from the air while they were flying at a low altitude over Russian land on the other side. No statements about this incident have been made by Ukrainian authorities. This Russian fire's origins, as well as those of numerous other flames, there is another explanation besides the overwhelming majority of them being attributed to Russian anti-troops and Ukrainian sabotage groups. In addition, the likelihood of this occurring is much greater now than everything that has occurred over the past few days. The fires are being blamed on Russian oligarchs. Let's look into the cause of the high likelihood, shall we? As a team from BCO, we will continue to use our expertise in accurate and impartial journalism to report on any new information pertaining to the war in Russia and Ukraine. By selecting the Super Thanks button, you can help our staff keep up with the most recent information on the schedule from reliable sources. In the very early phases of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, Putin and a sizable number of other politicians and oligarchs decided to attack. However, the events of the conflict's first year changed both lawmakers' and oligarchs' perspectives. This was because Putin was running out of money as Russia racked up debt on a regular basis. The first year of the conflict saw the deaths of about 150,000 Russian soldiers. In addition, the Soviet forces lost or destroyed thousands of tanks and other pieces of equipment. Politicians and oligarchs have made a target out of Putin's shaky situation in the government. Due to the way things are going politically in Russia right now, plans are being made for life after Vladimir Putin. Because of this, the power struggle between Russia's billionaires has also made its way onto the agenda as a result of the fires that broke out in Russia, the origin of which is, there are rumors that Russian oligarchs are setting important places in Russia on fire to get rid of Putin. The reality that Russian politics aren't getting along right now is proof that the accusations are true. One of the most well-known instances of political tension in Russia is the fight between Putin PR and Caddy. In the beginning, Yevgeny Prin, owner of the private military company WAG, was on board with Vladimir Putin's plan to attack Ukraine and seize its provisions. Prin still backs the invasion, but a lot has changed since then. Provision was easily available at the commencement of the invasion at Putin's beck and call. Even Putin's decision was impacted by his ideas and arguments. However, Russia's military was weakened as a consequence of the strengthening of the Ukrainian army with assistance from Western and European. Revision saw this as an opportunity and sent soldiers from the Wagner Group to the most vital areas that Russia was trying to occupy. This enabled the revision to profit from the Russian army's deterioration. Soldiers from the Wagner Group were in a lot of different places, particularly in the cities of Budmouth and Sodar, which the Russians who took over believed were the most important. PGA's position was bolstered as a consequence of the Wagner Group's presence in this territory. Over time, John began to criticize Putin and the Russian army. This was due to the reality that he had it in his mind to participate in the administration of Russia after Putin left office. Rams and Caddy is another name that has been suggested. When the fighting grew worse, Caddy Roth put Chechen soldiers in the areas where the fighting was happening because Putin was having trouble locating. He had no choice but to collaborate with Caddy and Precision in order to take action. As a result, Caddy, along with Prin, began negotiating for a Russia that would come after Putin. The call revealed sensitive information to Prin, which he had received from Putin. The material was so sensitive that it had to be cleaned. According to this claim, her vision and Caddy Rav agreed and they began making preparations for post-Putin. Putin, who is being cornered more and more each day, may wind up with his closest allies,